Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow on the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, coming to you live here to talk about college basketball, doing what we do. We have had massive support over the last few days from a lot of new viewers to the show, getting some new members to our FTN community. And I'm super ecstatic as the football season winds down. We're into bowl season right now, all kinds of tomfoolery and shenanigans happening with that. The NFL, the Seahawks with a nice win tonight. And I just got done watching Fresno State lose in overtime to Portland State. That is why we got a little bit of a late start here on the Super Show, but you guys can appreciate that, I'm sure. Had to sweat a little bit of last-minute stuff there. Nothing major, but getting across the finish line there with a few plays like Isaiah Hill and Enoch Boaknight, that worked out well. What we do here, if you're new to the show, is we talk about the main slate primarily from a DK focus in a game-by-game format. Not only will I provide you with each play or each game's optimal or what I believe to be optimal plays, any pricing errors. Will also give you a core to work with in all formats, PrizePicks plays, any props or betting opportunities as well. And if you're watching the show, please do support us by hitting that like button. I don't like to beg for likes. I know it's a tacky thing to do, but it really does help the show out and the network in general. It's such a simple thing to do. So if you could offer us that like there, even sharing the show, interacting throughout, commenting on demand or live, all of that adds up to interactions. The interactions are like gold. So I appreciate that. Super Show is doing some big things so far this year, and I'm really excited to see where we're going to be in March because I think we're going to have a lot of you watching and a lot of success here so far. The first month of the season, November, was great. We had a couple of tricky slates starting out in December, but this dynamic pricing, this tighter pricing has really led to some great results. We just saw a really interesting thing tonight that last year wouldn't normally happen because usually people are more in tune swapping and there's more sites providing ownership projections, and that's not really happening. And a player like KK Robinson from Little Rock, who wasn't expected to play tonight, was at $3K, dumped his price because he's been out for 8+ games. Turns out that he is going to play. He is going to start, and less than half of the field had time to react to that. He ends up going for 40 at $3K. That was a huge bonus. Also a DVP play in Enoch Boaknight, who for Fresno State had a big game there, a bunch of rebounds, bunch of block shots. So we're having fun here. Please consider joining us at ftndaily.com. There is the daily plus and the monthly or yearly subscriptions. One price to fit all, one Highlander to rule them all, if you will. Pro sports, esports, collegiate sports, niche sports, all of that stuff from written content, slate breakdowns. We have optimizers, projections, all sorts of tools that you need to succeed. And what I believe to be one of, if not the best Discord in all of the land. We post starting lineups. We post breaking news. We not only post them, but we talk about them. If we have time to analyze them, go over swaps, give reasons why we're doing those swaps. Today, when the Little Rock starting lineup came out, tagged the Discord, told everybody to swap. Don't care what you got to do. Swap KK in. If you got to leave salary, fine. Make swaps. Do what you need to do. A lot of us swapped into Isaiah Hill because of that. Ended up working out. So just that little bit of extra edge, advantage, and news to where you don't have to search Twitter, message boards, social media trying to find that info. You merely have to check into the Discord, and we provide that info for you. The nice thing about our community, not just me posting that information. Sometimes, I'm at work during the day. I do have to still work the day job. Also, on the West Coast, sometimes I have to bow out after the first wave of games, come home, do the family thing, take care of things there. It's going to be Christmas. It's a stressful time. So me not being around is not a death sentence. It's nice because we have community members who still post news, Twitter links, starting lineups, all of that stuff there as well. Hugely, hugely proud of this community that we've built. So with that being said, what is up, Alex? Good to see you. We're going to get into the slate there. A lot of you tuning in there. I know some of you tune in when FTN posts it on the Twitter thinking that it's something to do with NFL. Not offended if you don't want to hang around. I do appreciate you stopping by and checking out what it is about. The prize pools, not those NFL pools, I know. But in March, it will be some pretty tasty prize pools. Doing the legwork now, knowing the players, the teams, the vibes, all that stuff will pay off and put you in a position in March to win maybe some NFL style money, or at least enough money to win or to buy a washer and dryer for yourself. I know I harp about that a lot, but it is a proud adulthood moment for me. All right, we're going to get into this slate here. It is an 8-gamer. The flagship tournament on DK is a $12 2K to first. I know, not super exciting. I don't believe there is any Mania queues up at this moment. I am hearing that this weekend we will have the next one, though, it sounds like. So be prepared for that. A little bit of contest talk, strategies, that kind of thing. A lot of people ask me, what kind of contest do I play? I'm not as heavy into the MME stuff yet. I will be starting to get into that. I already have started to dabble, but primarily what I like to do personally and what I recommend to people, because sometimes you show a smaller score and it's like, oh man, that would have bubbled the jam, or that min cashed the jam. Yes, that's true. But if you would have been playing some of those double ups, those winner take alls, those 3-5 mans, single entry $5, single entry $4, single entry 12. I know these aren't like super exciting, glamorous contests, but they add up, and you don't need to have a 300 score to cash those, especially this year. So had you been able to hit about a 190 tonight and played everything on the board single entry, you would have walked away with a pretty nice evening there overall, not having to spike the big 300 score. I honestly thought tonight was going to be high scoring because all of the available value, but the pay-ups were pretty awful, and hardly anyone broke the slate except for KK, which most of us had, and it worked out just fine. So just want to kind of throw that tidbit at you that I know it's not super exciting to grind all those mid-tier single entry contests, but they do add up over time. As you get into March, you have yourself a pretty sizable bankroll to do some serious damage with. All right, let's get into it. It does lock a half an hour earlier than normal, so we usually have the 4 p.m. PST lock, 7 p.m. EST. That will be taking place earlier, 3:30 p.m. on the West Coast. What's that? 6:30 on the East Coast for those of you over there. So just be advised, a little bit of an earlier lock. I myself have a very unusually busy day at my day job, so I'm not dropping the article. I usually don't on Tuesdays anyways. Randall will. So we'll have the article out, or the show out here tonight. He will drop the article tomorrow. I will actually post an exposures list in the Discord tomorrow before I bow out. I will not be available until probably closer to lock tomorrow, so I just won't be around. But everything else, tools-wise, will be there for you to succeed in this slate, so no worries there. First game on the slate is going to be the Indiana Hoosiers taking on a team that might as well be called Janai Broome University, Morehead State. In this one, on Ken Palm, we have it a 77-67 home victory for Indiana. Only 10 points there given by Ken Palm, which is pretty interesting. This Indiana team is certainly no world beaters. Don't have to necessarily be too scared or worried about them by any means. They are 12.5-point favorites on DK, sort of like that Morehead State 12.5-point spread there. Total of 142. For Indiana, the Xavier Johnson story, he just has not been healthy. It's been years. It feels like it's legitimately been a decade since he's really been healthy. Still dealing with a foot injury. Hasn't had any in-game action now for nearly a month. Does not sound like he's going to be back anytime soon. Even if he were to play at 5'9", I know that price would be really, gripping for some. If he were to start, I think he would see a sizable amount of the ownership. But do we really want to trust him? Because he could easily come in, have an injury flare up, play 10 minutes, and then you're done anyway. So if he were to start and return in general, I think, taking a shot in one of your alt builds is fine, but we're just not in a main team capacity with him right now. It's way, way too risky. The primary options on this team, at least so far this season, have been Kel Ware, who Oregon hates losing, right? And Malik Renew, who is in the midst of a breakout season. Who knew that those two guys were going to play so well together, complement each other so well as front court players? But Renew's been able to play off of him very, very well, and it's taken Kel Ware's game to a whole nother level. Looking at Morehead State defensively, they're 193rd in defensive efficiency. They're not horrible. They're not great. They do have a very high turnover rate. That is something to be aware of here. Their offensive rebounding efficiency, 94th, 170th in defensive rebounding efficiency. So again, not horrible, but not great. Looking at the other upper tier opponents that they faced, Alabama, Purdue, and Penn State. Alabama was the first game of the year. Grant Nelson, who transferred in, had 24.7 rebounds as a front court player, giving them trouble. It was pretty balanced across the board elsewhere. Mark Sears still getting his conditioning back, so he wasn't great in that game. I know he's been great lately, but he wasn't in that game. The Purdue game in which they lost by 30, Braden Smith had 11 points, 8 rebounds, 11 assists, flirted with the triple-double there. Zach Edey, 18 and 8. It was such a big blowout that Edey barely played the minutes, wasn't really needed. And then the big loss to Penn State. In that game, Kanye Clary had 14. Quetus Wahab had 14 and 12. So you're seeing what I'm kind of getting at here with DVP. Ace Baldwin had 12, 5, and 4, and then a bunch of uninspiring stat lines the rest of the way. So we do like Kel Ware here. We do like Malik Renew because DVP says that front court athletic, hard-working post players can do well against them. Kel Ware is a bit spendy at 8.6, so it is a right off the top, a high price to pay. He's been really, really good. I don't mind using him if you end up going there. Looking at it rates-wise, 24% shot rate, a defensive rebounding rate of nearly 30%. That's 16th best in the country, and a block rate of 5%. Not only that, but he's shooting 43% from long range. 14 attempts, not a high volume, but it's the type of situation where if you step off of him or leave him open, he's going to take it, and the 7-footer can't hit it. He did attempt 55 threes last year as a freshman, made 27% of them, but still is able to take them. Very versatile player. Somebody who could do a lot of damage to this Morehead State team. You do get a significant discount to Renew. Doesn't have the same level of upside that Ware has. A little bit on the safe side. I know lately some of these really hardcore busts we've been enduring or watching others endure kind of make it to where I want to put a priority on safety. But Renew at almost 7K, maybe in that low 20s, isn't going to be the most eye-popping of plays, but I do think he has 30-35 fantasy upside in this matchup. And if I want to take advantage of that DVP and I can't get to Kel Ware, Renew's really the next best thing. He does have the highest usage rate on the team at 28%, which may shock some people, the highest shot rate on the team at 27.4%, and he also has an assist rate of 23.3%. He's playing that Derek Walker from Nebraska last year role of kind of a point forward, quarterback type of role where he's going to have his hands on the ball a lot. He's going to rebound a little bit. He's going to get some assists. He's going to hit shots. He does shoot threes, not particularly well, 27% on 11 attempts. He does block shots, and he gets himself to the free throw line. So he does a little bit of everything. I would be all in on him if he was a mid 5K range price point, which he would have been last year, and everybody else would have been probably on him too. But since he's 6'7", that is a price point that's going to put people to the test. I would expect very minimal ownership on him overall. The next best thing after those two is going to be Mackenzie Mbako at 5'8". He is that price point that we would have liked to have seen. He is looking at this. He started the season at 7'4" as a highly rated recruit. That obviously was way out of whack. His price now is the second highest it's ever been since he's been more acclimated, more of the option or the type of player that we expect him to be, which is about a low to mid 20s fantasy point per game scorer. Don't hate him at this price point whatsoever. Again, maybe we can take advantage of this DVP spot here. He's a little less trustworthy as a freshman, but that price point definitely offers us a little bit of upside. And then the guards for Indiana, it's really just kind of a revolving door. Trey Galloway there at 5'4". I'm not really probably going to trust Galloway. He is taking a ton of threes. He's only shooting 19%, but he is firing them away. 28 real points in the close loss against Kansas. They pushed them there. Very surprised to see Galloway play that way. He's very reliant on his scoring ability, and you'll see he has games where he scores 4, 2, and 5 real points. We want to rely on a guy who's going to have to score a lot. That seems kind of tough to me. especially if we think he's going to be chalk. As a chalk option, Galloway becomes a pretty easy fade for me. I could eat my words there, but generally I like to fade what I consider to be bad chalk. CJ Gunn, I thought was trending upwards. Minutes only played 5 last game, so we don't have to worry about him. And then Gabe Cupps, who has been starting in place of Xavier Johnson, playing a lot of minutes outside of a big game against Auburn. And that was a blowout loss. He's been a very low fantasy point per minute player, is only 3.8, and I do suspect we see ownership on him because of the way that people are wired to play in DFS. Stars and scrubs, no matter what, every time, whether the slate calls for it or not, means we should probably see a fair amount of Gabe Cupps across our opponents' lineups. And I always like Anthony Walker. He is a GPP special at 3.9. Not going to get enough minutes to really factor into your primary player pool, but does have the same skill set as Mbako and Renew in terms of he can pass a little bit. He's a solid enough rebounder and he can hit jumpers. In about 17 to 20 minutes, he pays off this price at a very high clip in this matchup. So don't forget about Anthony Walker as a GPP value. On the Morehead State side, our man Riley Minix. How far has he come? Remember, there were slates where Minix was priced near the minimum. He had a real big game against Alabama, a real big game after that against the non-D1, and he's just been the man for this team. Really just crushing it time and time again. Now he's priced at 8.8K. He has a 28.8% shot rate, 31% shot rate, 28.8% usage rate, only 25% in the long range, but that's not stopping him from chucking. I respect it. 80.3% of the minutes played. That's second on the team behind only Drew Thelwell. And he also has a block rate of 5.3%. He is doing a little bit of everything. Riley Minix is awesome. He is better than advertised coming up out of the, as a non-D1 star that he is. You see the last 3 games, 40, 35, and 34 minutes. Going to be on the floor a lot. Looking at how Kansas played Indiana, I think that Minix could end up being a big-time option here. That is an exorbitant price. When you look at the initial pay-up options, we have David Jones, who's been awesome. We're going to get into that game. Our man Woolbright from Western Carolina, who was a great play, chalk play every time Western Carolina was on the slate before, but he was never priced at 9.2. Kel Ware, Tyler Kolek, and Bryce Hopkins. Tyler Kolek, as good as he's been, he's a volatile pay-up, let's be honest. And Bryce Hopkins, extremely volatile. So the pay-up options, I mean, they're middling once again. We got our guy, Flanny, Tyree Samuel there, Reese Beekman at 8K. Like, there's not a lot of fantasy goodness with those pay-ups. It's going to be a bit of a more balanced build, but if you do decide to pay up, I think Minix is got to be, one of the better options. Here we are in 2023 with a different pricing format that we really haven't seen since 2015 pre-ban, and we're talking about possibly paying 9.2 for Vontarius Woolbright from Western Carolina and possibly playing 8.8K for Riley Minix from Morehead State. I just can't believe how much college basketball continues to amaze me. I love it. I don't know how you couldn't love it, but let's go. Absolutely enamored with this slate. Other options, or at least the starting 5 for this Morehead State in the let's talk about North Alabama. We don't need to look at the non-D1 game. Khalil Thomas, Drew Thelwell, Jordan Lathon, and Deontay Miles, the 7-footer. Now, when Morehead State was on the slate against Bama, they had all these, super cheap guys. Miles was another one that was like min price. He started from day one. He is a foul risk, but he has been playing around mid, teens to low 20s minutes. Pretty safe option there. So he is somebody who's going to continue to get minutes. And the bench outside of Eddie Ricks isn't really something to really concern yourself with in Morehead State. It's generally their starters that are going to get the majority of those minutes. Now, the only problem with using Miles is, hey, he's 4'2", that's great, but because he is a foul risk going up against a uber athletic front court in Indiana, Miles during his time at Xavier never really got over the hump, couldn't necessarily prove himself to be very consistent or a guy worthy of many minutes. He didn't get a lot of minutes for Xavier, and I don't think it's a really good situation to use him here. Outside of Minix, that leaves you with Thomas, Lathon, or Thelwell. Rick's coming off the bench at 4-3, playing a 20-minute role. He had a 46 fantasy point game recently against a non-D1. You look at his games against D1 competition, not really it. as they say. I think 5'7" Khalil Thomas is our best bet at a legitimate, cheap lineup fitting type play. Getting a lot of minutes, as I said, fits into what we want to do. Indiana's perimeter defense without XJ is certainly nothing to be afraid of. Thomas does have solid rates across the board, shooting 43% from long range, playing almost 80% of the minutes. So Thomas is kind of where I'm looking there. I think he'll have the weaker part of the defense for sure. And he's somebody that's going to be absolutely chucking from long range. That's something that we love with our sub 6K options, because at least we know they're going to be taking a ton of shots. Indiana's perimeter D, especially from beyond the arc, is very subpar. They're in the 250s per KenPom on their 3-point defense, and that's something that they're horrible at on offense as well. So not a situation we need to avoid. Look out for Khalil Thomas. I do think he is a very nice borderline core play. Thelwell at 6'3" is probably priced about where he should be, but he could take over for the same reasons as Thomas. And then Jordan Lathon takes a ton of threes too. He was pretty cheap coming up out of that first game against Alabama. Now he's priced up to 6'6". Morehead State they have a lot of talent. Their starting five is as good as anyone in their conference in the Ohio Valley. And I think he's fine to use as well. Took 18 shots in their last game, 16 a few weeks ago. He's definitely a high volume guy that you can use. And I want to definitely use one of these Morehead State guys. If it's not Minix, Thomas, Lathon, Thelwell, all those guys feel pretty good to me. I might just rotate through them. All right, next game on the slate. Georgetown versus Butler. Now, this is a fun one. Let me pull up this. So Georgetown dealing with illnesses and injuries. KenPom has it 83-70 in favor of Butler. Georgetown under Ed Cooley still figuring things out. 282nd in defensive efficiency. We saw they had to go to overtime against Notre Dame to end up beating them by 4. Butler 82nd in defensive efficiency, playing at a 120th fastest tempo, 196 for Georgetown. So it's not going to be a uber fast game. Not going to be super slow either. It is an 11.5 point spread for Butler on DK with 150 total. Now, Jaden Epps, who is dealing with an illness, missed their last game, came back. Looks like he's going to be good to go. This is basically a near 40-minute per game player. They definitely could have used him in the game against Notre Dame. Not having him really spelled doom, but they ended up pulling away just fine. So I would be surprised if Epps doesn't play. 7-1 against Butler. I would think people would want to jump back in because he's been so safe, but he's going to be having to draw that matchup, Posh Alexander, and similar to Darrell Reeves of yesteryear, Revis Island, as they'd said in the NFL, putting wide receivers on islands. Posh has a way of putting other guards on an island and making them useless, forcing them into bad shots or just keeping the ball in their hands in general or racking up steals. So Epps is in for a tough one here, regardless, coming off of a serious illness. And I know sometimes illnesses get looked at like, why aren't you playing? But after being hospitalized last year myself with a severe flu, I can tell you sometimes these flus are real bad news. So, and it's that season and it's kind of going through, and we're seeing a lot more kids right now playing with illnesses. If he goes, though, you have to certainly consider him. The starting group that we would see without Epps: Dontrez Styles, Ish Masood, Jay Heath, Rowan Brumbaugh, and Supreme Cook. Now, Rowan Brumbaugh was real good in the first game without Epps against Coppin State. Granted, it was Coppin State. He had some struggles in that game against Notre Dame, did end up putting up a decent enough number. At 6K without Epps, I would certainly look his way to a degree, but that would also mean he's going to be drawing that matchup with Posh, which I don't like for him. He's still a very raw offensive option. And there were times against Notre Dame they had to pull him out. He ended up playing most of the second half, but in the first half, it seemed like he was getting coached up on the sidelines there watching that game. We finally saw a game from Jay Heath in which he looked like the best player on the court. 10 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, on his way to 26.5 DK points in 38 minutes in the overtime. Just when you think it's safe to go back in the water and use a player like Jay Heath is when he's going to have a falter. I'm not going to trust Jay Heath, but the price is solid. I do agree. Dontrez Styles, guard forward eligibility. You saw the good and the bad with him, right? Coppin State swapping to him because of Epps being out. He gave us almost 40. Then you see what he does against Notre Dame. Only 16, played 44 minutes. That's just Dontrez Styles, man. He has never been the guy throughout the course of his career. He didn't get the coaching he probably needed, the development he needed at North Carolina with Hubert Davis. Now he's getting it with Ed Cooley, but he's behind the course for where he would have been. If he started with Ed Cooley and went to Providence, for example, by now Dontrez Styles would be a very, very good, like Ben Teal on crack, basically. If you guys remember how good Ben Teal was a couple of years ago for Providence, like that's how good Styles could be. But he's well behind that mark right now. So we're not paying that 7-2 for him against Butler. Probably not even going to be using Supreme Cook, who has had some really strong games, but against some upper tier competition, we've seen him struggled with his foul issues. That's the main thing that would keep me off of Supreme Cook. And our main guy that we've been using the last couple slates from Georgetown has been Ish Massoud, 5'5" and 5'8". They have jacked his price up to 6'8", playing lots of minutes, taking lots of shots. He's still technically in play, but 6'8" is definitely a decision, and he's not a priority anymore. Instead of starting with Ish, we're probably ending with him in that we have this last man in sector right around 7K, 6'5". Can we use Ish Massoud? He's a forward. He has that going for him. He's definitely usable in that regard, but no longer a priority. On Butler, Posh Alexander. Right here, let me make sure I'm doing this right. So I don't have the Butler Posh jersey yet. I got the St. John's one there, and I'm waiting on our guy Rob, super Butler fan, to get on that for me. But Posh is my guy. What's up, Hybrid TV? Thanks for checking us out on Twitch. Appreciate it, man. 7K is a lot to pay for Posh. I admit that. I know that, but this is a game that should be relatively close. I think it'll be closer than the spread says, at least throughout the first, half and into the second half. I do think Butler ultimately pulls away and wins, especially in the end of the game when they're able to rack up free throws, which I do think will be something we get out of Posh Alexander. 7K is a tremendous amount of money to spend on him, and I get that. But he has been taking more shots lately, still not hitting threes. His steal rate is elite as ever. He has a high assist rate. The guys around him on Butler are making shots, which is something that kept his assists on the lower side at St. John's the last couple of years, but he's doing really well. And they surrounded him to a degree with shooters. I know they didn't build this team around him with him in mind, but it did work out that way. DJ Davis, who transferred in from the Big West, he's a three-point shooter. That is certainly working to Posh's advantage. Jameel Telfort, who hits threes, he transferred in. He's been playing outrageously good. And Pierre Brooks, who transferred in from the Spartans, he's been hitting threes and making shots and being a really dangerous offensive weapon. So all these offensive guys around Posh have just made his game and elevated his game that much more. They still are a little bit spotty on the front court. Jalen Thomas sometimes, Andre Screen, Connor Turnbull. Sometimes they go small with Bizjack. Like it's not a great situation in the front court, but it hasn't had to be. And they're getting a fair amount out of Jalen Thomas in the small amount of minutes he plays, or when he is not getting into foul trouble. He's looked pretty good, and he's rebounding at a very high level. So there's a myriad of good options on this Butler team, but they're all priced pretty much where you would expect them to be. I think we want to target against Georgetown, just like we did when Patrick Ewing was at the helm. A little bit less with Ed Cooley, but he doesn't have his guys in place yet. It's going to take time for that to get the program built and his, his model. Thad Matta's doing a great job in Butler. They're 9-2. Don't look now. Blowout loss to Michigan State and a tough loss on the neutral court to a Florida Atlantic that they could have won easily. That could have gone the other way. Took it to double overtime to Cal. An overtime win over Texas Tech. A close win over Penn State. Like, they're battle tested, and this game against Georgetown, and it's at home. They start they don't get any more non-con games that I'm seeing on their schedule. So it's time. Roll up your sleeves, and it's time to get going. We're going to see who are the non-con heroes and who are for real. And we know Posh Alexander is for real, and that's kind of why I defer to him. If all the options that are 7K plus on this team, he's the one that I would trust the most. 24% usage rate, a steal rate of 3.5%, and he has an assist rate of 30% as well. I just wish those 3-point shots would go down for him. Pierre Brooks shooting 41% from long range, Telfort 36, Davis 33%, and Landon Moore 32% off the bench. Just enough here to do some damage. Now, Pierre Brooks comes with guard forward eligibility. If we're having a hard time filling the forward slot, I don't mind paying $7K for him. It is plausible. He's taking a ton of shots, as you can see with his shot rate, 24.3%, one of the highest on the team, only behind Jameel Belfort, who is 26% shot rate. But Brooks has just been an uncanny, consistent scorer. Maybe not the highest upside at the 7K, but I do think he kind of glides into a 4X number. And again, we've been seeing a lot of busts or uncharacteristically low scores. Sometimes having your lineup full of safe options gets the job done. We saw it just today. Telfort at 7.6. Every slate, I'm like, nah, it's an easy fade, but then he drops 50, 43, 36. So I don't want to call him an easy fade at 7.6. It is it's probably too rich for me to pay going up against Supreme Cook. He doesn't get into foul trouble. He's not like this big time banger type player either. He's going to have to play some 4, small ball 5 when Jalen Thomas is getting a water break. And I don't know how many minutes they can give to Connor Turnbull, for example, or Andre Screen, who has been decent, the 7-footer. So I like Telfort. I think he is a tough defend for somebody like Supreme Cook. He's going to score a lot. I don't know that he can take advantage with his rebounds. And if he's not scoring, 20 real points, I do have a real problem with paying that price for him because I don't think he'll do enough to pay it otherwise. DJ Davis at 5.5. I do think that's a sneaky. It's a buy low option. It's that range where we've been able to really, pull some lower owned options out and do well with. Also reliant on his scoring ability, but he's so cheap at 5.5. He hits 4 or 5 threes, totally doable. Only adds us a couple of peripherals, whether that's a steal, a couple assists, a couple rebounds. He's going to be at value. So I do like Davis as well. I don't know that I necessarily want to stack Butler, but their games have been so good and so close and going into overtimes. Granted, I don't have an overtime projection for you. I can joke about it, but this is really one of those games where a mini stack could end up winning you everything. So keep that in mind. I think a lot of people will take one out of here and walk, and it's going to be Epps if Epps plays. That's really what I think. So a lot on the Butler side that we can look to and use. Andre Screen has some really great rates. If he were to get 20 minutes, he would be absolutely phenomenal at 4.7, but we can't trust his minutes right now. Next game on the slate, Florida versus Michigan. Now, this is one that I think is actually the true stack of the slate, or one of the top stacks of the slate. It's got 157.5 total. Florida are 3-point favorites. Michigan has been a frustrating team, but one thing they have been doing well is semi-breaking slates, either their opponents or them. And it's been tough to get away from Michigan games. And if you do, generally you've had kind of a rough time. Like that Iowa game where they scored 90 against Iowa, they had 5 different guys eclipse for, 20 plus fantasy points. On the Iowa side, Ben Krikke went off. So this is a matchup we definitely want to look to. Starting on the Michigan side, you generally want to start with Doug McDaniel, high usage guard. It's a tough price to pay for him, but this is a matchup against Florida I do think he can exploit to a degree. However, Florida's defense and the style that they play, they're up-tempo. They're the 16th fastest team in the country, but top 50 defense. They do like to force turnovers. They do cause a ton of chaos. If Doug's not hitting his shots and he gets a little bit, off kilter there or rattled early on, this play could go sideways. And it has in the past. 2 of his last 3 games, he's been under 25 fantasy points. So he's not a lock and load play, but we have seen Doug be relatively chalky throughout. When he was 6.8, 7K, like those type of prices, 7.8 might keep his ownership down to a degree. But he's been really quite good against the quote unquote upper tier teams like Oregon, 44.5 fantasy points, 35 against Stanford, he had 48 against St. John's. Like he can fill it up in a hurry. He has a high assist rate. He can do a numerous amount of things to pay off this 7.8 price point. I do like Oliver Mkwa. He has the ability to bang down low and rack up rebounds. He has the ability to hit shots outside. I think that the Florida interior defense is a bit intimidating, but it won't be for Mkwa. who is somebody that I think will actually end up being a tough cover for somebody like a Micah Handlogden or even Alex Condon, who's been awesome in short spurts. MQuad does have a usage rate of 25%, a combined rebounding rate over 25%, making 38% of his threes, which is one of the highest marks on the team. He is just overall a very safe option as well. And he's been able to prove himself against tougher competition and still relatively high floor, even in games like Texas Tech, Oregon, Indiana, still eclipsed 24 fantasy points in each of those games. You need more at 7-7. I know we need to hit that 30-plus mark, but at least there's some safety there for him and some of the of his ability at that price to still not totally torpedo your lineup. By the way, mark your calendars. Penn State, Michigan plays Penn State Sunday, January 7th. You will want all of the Oliver MQuad you can handle in your lineups, all of the Terrace Reed. There's the big DVP spot against Penn State, and I'm highlighting any team and any front court player against them right now. So Oliver is going to be our lock and load play that day. Please believe it. Nimari Burnett, he's been relatively chalky as well. Sub 6K option. I was pushing Burnett for years. He's never healthy. He's finally healthy. He's taking all the shots he wants. He has been pretty good. He can pay off this price point. He's a pretty uninspiring option for me, especially if he attracts a lot of ownership. I'm not really that interested, but he is there, and that is the situation with him. Value-wise, Will Schroeder has been a decent look at 4K playing 20 minutes. Not a huge upside there, but those who are looking to get away with a 3X value play at 4K, that is suitable and can happen for him. Also for Trey Jackson at 3.9, a similar situation there as well. On the Florida side, Walter Clayton recently became a father, his first kid, and what he proceeded to do was go out and score like 18 real points at halftime against ECU. He cooled off in the second half, still hit 30. I love Walter Clayton. I think he's one of the best GPP plays whenever Florida's on the slate. I got away with using him in my main a few times earlier this year, the game against Pittsburgh. I'm a big Walter Clayton guy, definitely. Don't know that we need to find a way to roster him at 7.9. It's definitely a luxury play, but I love him anytime you consider using him, definitely. Tyrese Samuel, same thing in 8.3, more of a luxury play. He's pretty safe from foul trouble generally. He's playing a lot of minutes. The ECU game, he only took 3 shots, which was concerning. He's generally been taking a lot more shots, but when you start to look at what this Florida team's doing as they get healthy, they just have a numerous amount of guys at his position that are demanding shots, and I think it's going to continue to hurt him there. His secondary stats, rebounds, shot, blocks, steals, assists are very good and strong, but we need him to still shoot those 10-plus shots to really push him into that tier where he deserves to be paid 8.3 for. Zion Pullen at 7.3. I think he's a little bit overpriced for where we want to look right now. He took 15 shots against ECU. He's been good. He's active. He's playing a lot of minutes, but that just feels like a little bit too much to me. My man, Riley Kugel, who we all expected to have a big breakout season. It started off that way. It really did. He 45 against Loyola Maryland, 45 against Baylor, 32 against Wake Forest, but the last 3 games, he's been real awful. And 2 of those last 3, he's failed to take more than 6 shots. And that's just a product of these other options coming in for Florida. And it's really impacted his minutes as well because he's turning the ball over a lot. His defense isn't really that strong on ball. And if he's not making shots, he's 0 for 10 from long range in his last 2 games, 1 for 13 over his last 3. He was knocking down his threes with reckless abandon before that. It's really become a situation where he's a liability on the floor. So you can't use Kugel at 6.7. And his price should be dropping with these performances. I am a little bit surprised with the way DK's pricing has been, that 11, 17, and 9 over his last 3 games, that we're not looking at a 6K situation. I thank them for not pricing him at 6K because I think that my donkey ass would be looking to use him in a buyback or a bounce back situation, but I'm very uncomfortable talking and using Riley Kugel at this time. Will Richard, 6'4", same thing. He's done what we would expect Kugel to do, and that's caused his price to just explode to 6'4". So we can probably safely get away from him, but he's playing the minutes and getting the shots that we expected from Riley Kugel. That could swap at any time, and Will Richard does have a low floor, so you need to be aware of that. But this matchup against Michigan is pretty good for him on paper, and looking at the way that people have been rostering these mid-range 6K to 7K guys, they've been pretty chalky. So I do think we see ownership on Rashard. Alex Condon, 6'9". Can't use him technically in your main, but GPP-wise, you want to use him. He has a very solid fantasy point per minute number. He only needs 20 minutes to completely shatter most slates. I think he's going to be a problem for Michigan. I think we're looking at a guy that if he gets props, we'll take a look at DK's props here at the end. I think he's a damn near a shoe-in for 10-plus rebounds. Points, I wouldn't feel as comfortable to predict there. It's a little spotty because he's going to have putbacks. He's not featured on offense, but he's in there to block shots and he's in there to own the glass, and he does both of those things extremely well. Alex Condon next year is going to be such a pivotal player for this Florida team, depending on who they get in the portal. But looking at him starting, at the 4 next year, possibly the 5, maybe next to Micah Hanlogden, he's going to be really, really good. Speaking of Micah Hanlogden, he's back. He's healthy. 26 minutes logged against ECU. So, and 19 before that, back in the starting lineup. He's good to go. But just another player that gets lost in that forward shuffle. So under 5K, I like the idea of using him. At 5'3", he's a little bit less exciting to me. And then another player in that rotation, Thomas Howe, who only played 4 minutes against ECU with Hanlogden. His minutes probably going to continue to fall down, but he's been very solid, especially defensively, and I think he finds a role in this team. So it's just another guy in the mix there to get minutes. Overall for Florida, I think that our best bet is probably the chalkier Will Rashard, or we go to our luxury play Walter Clayton, or you just say, F it, bite the bullet. I need to pay up all these pay ups on the slate. I'm not playing Woolbright and Minix. Not saying I'm not, but just maybe you feel that way. The next best option might be just paying 8.3 for Tyrese Samuel, because it would be a shock to me if he didn't hit at least 4x, 3.5 to 4x, and that just could be enough to be optimal on this particular slate. And then on the Michigan side, again, starts with Doug McDaniel if you want to get him in. It's such a weird game because, like I said, I think this one could end up being the stack you need to win GPPs, but all of the prices on these guys are just basically where they should be. Very 2022 Creighton-esque. So we'll have to figure out a pecking order that we want there. But there's going to be a couple guys that come out of here with big scores, no doubt. Next game on the slate, we have Virginia versus Memphis. We got some Twitch viewers. All right. I like it. Twitch, doing our thing on Twitch. The Memphis Virginia game has a total of 131. Memphis 3-point favorites. Now we know from looking at it and just experience that Virginia games are going to be low owned. A lot of people just X them out of their player pool entirely. And generally, I'm inclined to do the same when it comes to the Virginia side, because this year, our best bets on Virginia are just priced up. Reese Beekman, who we have loved for years, he is just such a hard player to pay 8K for, because while he's taking more shots this year, yes, he's not doing it as consistently as I would like to see, and he is fully capable of disappearing from games for long stretches, and that's very, very tough. Generally, I like to look at Beekman's props anytime his PRA is projected or given by the books at like 18.5, 19.5, sometimes 20.5. I like to slam the over, but he gets a lot of his value from blocks and steals as well, which is very hard on a game-to-game basis to predict. So Beekman has been awesome, but we're paying an 8K price where we're not getting any upside. And I know I've kind of been preaching safety, so he fits that bill. But there is just so many guys around him that not only give us safety, but they also give us upside as well. So it's a little bit harder for me to justify Beekman, but the Memphis matchup for him on paper is really, really good. Memphis is a team that is going to play with pace. They're top 20 in the country there. They have a solid defense. They don't rebound particularly well, so that is something that Beekman will do well. They do turn it over. They're sloppy. They've got Javon Quinterly handling the rock a lot, so they're sloppy with the rock. Caleb Mills comes in there. He's more of a shooter, but they're susceptible to giving up a lot of rebounds. They're susceptible to giving up a ton of steals and blocks to their opponents, and this is where Beekman comes in looking like a solid option, but I'm just not crazy about his 8K price. Same can be said for Ryan Dunn, who does a lot of the things that Reese Beekman does. he's just kind of in the Beekman role from the last couple of years. He's not getting a ton of shot volume. He's not scoring a lot, but he's racking up those, peripheral stats. So we like Dunn, but 6'9", which is the cheapest price he's been in like a month and a half. Don't get me wrong, but still a little bit tougher, I think, to pay that price. Instead, you have a guy like Isaac McNeely, who's taking a ton of shots. I've mentioned this a few times, but in case it's your first time viewing in and checking out the show, the Virginia Cavaliers staff has put a ton of time and effort into perfecting his shot. McNeely came in and he was a guy they identified very early as being one of their shooters in this Virginia pro offense. They have to, guys have to be able to shoot, a la Kyle Guy, as much as I hate Kyle Guy from the Auburn run. McNeely's shot was a little bit funky, but they identified him being a guy who could be a gunner, and they spent so much time and effort. He's going to continue to get minutes, and you're seeing him play an assload amount of minutes, for lack of a better term. 37, 32, 36. I know he had a 26 and 25 wedge in there, but those were two blowout games. In closer games, this guy's going to play 35 to 38 minutes. There's just no doubt about it. And he's taking a ton of shots, most of which are threes. 22 real points against Syracuse, 22 real points against NC Central. Sometimes the threes don't fall. He shot 3 for 12 against New England. That was a game they nearly lost. It was, trouble in paradise there against Northeastern, 56-54 home win. But McNeely's shot rate has ballooned to 24%. He's got the 11th best three-point rate at 55% makes. That's 11th best, as I mentioned. He is definitely a viable option, even though he relies on his scoring ability. We're not talking about a 7K guy here where it's like, there's only really one player we could ever be like, the hell with peripherals. We're paying 8K for Cam Thomas of LSU. Like, Cam Thomas just scored 40 with one rebound. Like, just amazing. Rarely can we feel good about somebody like that. So McNeely at 5K, we can be okay with that, because if he gets us one rebound, he still might score 18 real points. So I'm okay using him at 5K, and he's definitely a guy that's, as of now, up high on my player pool list. Memphis 3-point defense is middling, so it's not as if we can expect McNeely to get completely shut down. Have to like him quite a bit. The other Virginia options, at least in the starting lineup, they've been using Andrew Rohde, the St. Thomas transfer, who has been, kind of struggling, as most people thought he would, but he's playing a lot of minutes because defensively he does what Coach Bennett likes. Just played 31 minutes in that close game against Northeastern. Jake Groves, who's been operating as the 5, he's been trading places with Blake Buchanan. And then we're seeing minutes from Leon Bond, Elijah Gertrude, and Tane Murray, but spot minutes at best. If Buchanan were to get back in the starting lineup at 3-8, he's definitely a viable look here. Fouls can be a problem for him. I think the Memphis front court has the athleticism to give him trouble, so I don't know that we'll see many minutes from him. I think Jake Groves is probably better suited, but he's not a banger either. And we're seeing a DVP spot develop here, and it has been the case for the last 3 years against Virginia. People are just very anti-using anyone in Virginia games, but bigs against Virginia is absolutely a semi-nut spot. You only need to look at the Northeastern game, which has a player, an undersized player, but he does play positions 1 through 5 during his time at Holy Cross. Talking about Joe Pridgeon, who transferred from Wellington and Holy Cross, been at Northeastern for a couple of seasons now. Not what you would consider to be a big, but he had 13 rebounds against Virginia, and he operated a lot of the times as the 4 in that game. It just was very successful. And one thing that Virginia struggles with is guys who are attacking in the glass relentlessly. It is a big-time DVP spot that people still to this day don't want to accept, acknowledge, or really just look at and even consider using. You can go back to the Texas A&M game. They lost 59-47, but it was no fault of Henry Coleman, who had 16 points and 14 rebounds. He was completely unstoppable. Now, what ended up happening is Virginia had some threes and were able to ice the game, but Texas A&M just went away from Coleman inexplicably. If they would have continued to attack, they would have been fine, but they panicked a little bit. You look at the West Virginia game, Jesse Edwards had 17 and 9. He's going to be on the shelf for a couple weeks with an injury, but that's a pretty solid game against any Virginia squad. The game in which Wisconsin just belt walloped Virginia 65-41. Stephen Crowell had 15 and 10. Crowell, not really known as the low post destroyer type, but he had a really nice game and was a very tough cover for them throughout. And then you go back and you look at what Tyree Samuel did, running a lot of 5 against Virginia. 10 real points, but 11 rebounds, 3 assists, a block, and a steal. Micah Hanlogden, who played center against them, 14 points and 14 rebounds. So 2 different players there absolutely dominating against Virginia, and it continues every time they play a team with a solid enough big. The problem here with Memphis is their front court. Penny Hardaway tortures us from a DFS perspective because he rotates the bigs through over and over. Sometimes it's Nick Jourdain. Sometimes it's Ashton Hardaway. Maybe a little bit of Malcolm Dandridge. You see sometimes Jaquan Walton plays the 4 or 5. David Jones can slide down and play the 5, but they usually use him at the 3. So we don't necessarily have a guy who can take advantage, and nobody on the team has these mega elite rebounding rates except for Malcolm Dandridge, who's got a 30% combined, and Nick Jourdain, who has an 11.4% offensive rebounding rate. The issue with those guys is minutes are sometimes hard to come by because of that rotating, substitution pattern. Just the other game, Penny was doing 5-man subs. Also, Dandridge has a foul rate of 8 fouls per 40, which is the highest of his career, and this is a career 6 fouls per 40 kid. So you can't really trust him because of fouls to take advantage of this matchup. Then you look to Nick Jourdain, who, okay, can he get some offensive rebounds? Can he perhaps get 25 minutes? He has a foul rate that is the highest of his career at 5.2 per 40, and he's a 4.8, 4.9 career average, and has that rotation in the front court. Now, he has started the last 3 games. He played 21, 29, and 22 minutes. That was against VCU, Texas A&M, and Clemson. So upper tier teams that he got minutes against. 11-4 against Clemson, 4-3 against Texas A&M, 5-2 against VCU. So it's going to be one of those guys, but their game logs and what they've been able to accomplish with their minutes has been very lackluster. There is so much negative going against them right now that it's very tough. Had Jordan Brown, which I don't even know if Jordan Brown is in the program anymore. I heard rumors he wasn't, then he was, and then he's sick. If Brown were to come back into the program and play at 4K, I guess, but even his rotation when he was healthy and not out 1 foot out the door was really not that great. Price-wise, they're nice options. Nick Jourdain at 4-1. I think it's probably more of a GPP situation, and with Malcolm Dandridge at 5K, kind of the same thing. Both are extremely risky at their prices because of Penny Hardaway's rotation, not because of them individually and not because of this matchup against Virginia. Do not be surprised if one of those guys does end up having a monstrous game and one of them just has an epic torpedo of a failure game. It probably won't be Ashton Hardaway. I can tell you that much. It's going to be Jourdain or Dandridge, perhaps Walton if he gets some minutes down in the low block, who's been seeing his minutes increase lately again, which is a good thing. Or do we just go David Jones at 8-7? But his game isn't really to take advantage of what Virginia's weak at. And I think that Jones' scoring ability is going to be negated a little bit by the wing defense and having Reese Beekman harass him. So I'm a little bit light on David Jones compared to what the field probably will be. And as a DVP donkey, if you will, I'm really having a hard time not wanting to click one of those guys in. I put a huge value on matchup in DVP spots. That's just something that we've had success with over the years. So that is in my formula, something that I value and prioritize more than the next guy or most of the industry. Both will probably start, so we're not going to be able to glean a lot of information. It's going to be a situation where if you like the rest of your lineup, then you're going to make up in your mind, if Nick Jourdain gives me 5 fantasy points, can the rest of these guys in my lineup make up that difference? If the answer is yes, most definitely, then do it. If the answer is maybe not, then you probably want to go back to the drawing board, because I don't think you need to get too risky there, but this is a DVP spot that works and has continued to work. Western Carolina versus Vanderbilt. this is really quite a tough spot to not want to be all over Western Carolina. I have no respect for Vanderbilt, whether they are actually going to be good or not in this game. That's another story. They're 3-point favorites against Western Carolina. This Western Carolina team's been on the slate a couple of times. They're fantastic. Ken Palm has it 74-72 in favor of Western Carolina. So I'm certainly, even before seeing that, betting Western Carolina at +3. It wouldn't shock me to see them be favorites by the time Locke gets through in that game. We know the story with Vanderbilt and how Jerry Stackhouse is going to do things. He runs a rotation that is constantly kind of like Penny, super deep one game. Then it's like he plays 6 guys the next. Sometimes his regular starters come off the bench. Sometimes he'll start his starters and play them 35 minutes. It's really hard to trust anyone on this roster, and it's mainly not their fault. It's mostly the coaching staff's fault. Looking at prices like Tyron Norris at 6'7", he's not even usable right now. He's taking shots. He's getting jerked around. We can't really trust him. Ezra Mannion at 6'1" is our best bet, but he's been lousy the last couple of games. The defense has given him real problems. It's also tough for him to get into a rotation or into a rhythm with all these constantly moving pieces subbing in and out. Then Alan Lubin is, I think, going to be my favorite option on Vanderbilt more often than not, but he has been priced up to 6'6", almost $7K now, which is going to be a tough, deliverable, actionable price for me to get behind. They've had tougher matchups lately against San Francisco and Texas Tech, and he still held his own. This theoretically should be a matchup against Western Carolina where he should be able to do work on the glass. Western Carolina, 238th in offensive rebounding efficiency. However, they are the 17th best team in defensive rebounding efficiency, and their defense isn't as horrible as some of these other teams that we've seen come across. They're 188th in defensive efficiency, and they're a team in the Southern Conference that could very well end up playing for a tourney bid and winning their league. I'm pretty confident in this Catamount squad that has wins over Notre Dame, Middle Tennessee, and UNC Asheville, in which they give Drew Pember a run for his money. Losses against Gardner Webb and High Point, but they are coming off a nice win against USC Upstate. So this team is nice. They haven't really been tested all that much, but owning those wins over Notre Dame, McNeese State, and Middle Tennessee are going to look good here in March. That McNeese State team, coached by Will Wade, the American gangster, coming off a last-minute win over Louisiana yesterday, by the way, are 10-2, and they're going to be dancing for sure. So Van Lubin makes sense. You can get him there at 6'6". He's a forward. He has upside in this matchup. I don't mind him, but I'm really having a hard time coming to terms with using Vanderbilt guys in my main lineup right now. It just doesn't seem like a winning proposition. It does appear that Evan Taylor's getting a ton of minutes, but he's not doing a lot with them. And Colin Smith, who is back, sort of, played only 4 minutes against Texas Tech. He had a concussion-like symptoms, which tripped him up. And if he's not starting, you really can't use him. But if he does start at 5'1", I have at least some interest there because we've seen him in the past pop. On the Western Carolina side, which is much more of an agreeable team to talk about for DFS purposes. In their last game, this is what the starting lineup they typically use. Our man Vontarius Woolbright, Trey Jackson, Russell Jones, DJ Campbell, and Charles Lampton. The bench pieces that would normally get in a close game, at least minutes, Bernard Pelote and Kamar Robertson, sometimes Cornelius Williamson, the freshman, but not somebody we can really rely on. So we want to look at the starting, and it starts with Vontarius Woolbright, who is playing 88.1% of the available minutes. He has the 6th highest usage rate in the country at 35.1%. The second best defensive rebounding rate in the country at 33.3%, 59th highest shot rate at 31.6%, and he also has a top 90 assist rate at 30.4%, and he's drawing 7.2 fouls per 40. That rate is in the top 25. The only downside to his game is he doesn't really shoot threes. He's made 3 of 10. It's really not a part of his game. He is going to do everything else, and that's really impressive considering the fact that he had a 35-point game against Gardner Webb, real points, not fantasy, without making a 3. 23 real points against Asheville without making a 3. 25 real points against High Point without making a 3. In fact, he has not made a 3-pointer since the end of November, in which he made 2 of them against Tennessee Tech. in a 50-point fantasy game in which he had 22 points, 16 rebounds, and 5 assists. That was a stretch where he produced 19, 16, and 6, 22, 16, and 5, and 14, 7, and 7 to close out November. Woolbright is an absolute stud. I know 9.2 is a ridiculously high price, but he was mega chalk against Notre Dame at 7K. I thought he was going to be sneaky, honestly, because I hadn't realized people knew who he was in that matchup. He's just been phenomenal game in and game out. I'm really, really considering going back on my, if not avoiding the 9K plus guys. Just over the weekend, who victimized us against Kentucky? Armando Bacot in a matchup he should have absolutely wreaked havoc in. We get victimized by these pay-up options so many times this year, and those mid-tier balanced builds are just raking. But Woolbright is got me kind of in his clutches, even at 9.2, which I hope people will feel is a egregious price to pay for somebody on Western Carolina. But the matchup's right. His rates are right. He's just continuing to contribute at a high level and is clearly the best player on this Western Carolina team. So I'm enamored there and don't really see myself fading him. I don't. So I'm going to have to find a way to get him in there. Next up, you have Trey Jackson in the starting rotation there at 6'6", playing over 30 minutes per game. He's an okay option. If you do fade Woolbright, and maybe we think people are going to be stubborn like me and play Woolbright, then he would be the nice little pivot off. You do have some value in DJ Campbell at 4'4", who's at least getting those starter minutes. He's shooting about 30% from long range. Doesn't have any particularly great rates, although he has got a shot rate that's hit 21% in recent games. Relatively decent look at 4'4". Not a ton of upside, no, but he can knock down threes. He can contribute enough to pay that price off. And Pelote, who comes in as a forward at 5'4", he's a pretty easy fade, I would say. Really just look to Woolbright or Jackson and then a pay down of Campbell. That's how we want to play it. All right, next game on the slate here, Troy versus Ole Miss. Starting with the Ole Miss side, we have the 3 guard stud trio that has done really well so far. Our man Alan Flanagan, who's seeing his price start to drop a little bit. He was up over 9K, still producing at a fairly high level, but 8.2 is agreeable. Matthew Morrell at 7.5, who has seen his price kind of bounce up and down. He had a nice one against Cal. Ole Miss, they dropped a bad one against UCF. We were very high on Jalen Murray. He's sitting there at 7.2, but we got to take a step back on all 3 of those because in light of the stay that the lawsuit there against the NCAA for 2-time non-grad transfers to have a 14-day window to play and have this figured out. And now the NCAA is basically saying, you got us, we give up. We'll have an answer for you, but after the spring. So spring sports, winter and spring sports are able to now have 2-time non-grad transfers play. That means several players who weren't expected to play this season are now playing. Brandon Murray, sitting there at 5'3", will be playing. He played against Cal, played 17 minutes, wasn't particularly great. I wouldn't have expected him to be. Missed the first month and a half of the season, playing for a new team. Brandon Murray has to get time, with this squad where he's going to get acclimated and start learning his teammates. This is a kid who played his freshman year at LSU, where he was very decent, solid, above average at times. Then he went to Georgetown, where he played immediately, had a high usage role for them, decides to go to Ole Miss here and was, again, expected to sit out for the year. But now he's back, came off the bench, played 17 minutes. Not a real great game, but again, I wasn't expecting him to. At 5.3K in a matchup against Troy, in which it would make sense to get Murray some more time and acclimated to the team before SEC games really start to begin. 5.3 is a great price, especially if he were to start. The best way for this to go down would be for the first 2, because all these games are happening early. This is the complete opposite of tonight's slate, where we had the later game there. Most of these games will be started by 4 p.m. Pacific time. It's only the Marquette Providence game after that. So we're not going to be able to jockey people out. I was going to say the best would have been for the starting lineup for Ole Miss to come out very late, close to that game's lock, and Brandon Murray to be starting. Then we could just throw him in there and be good to go. But I don't think it'll matter, because I think people will be sharp and know that Murray, how good he's been in the past, that price, he's back, he's available. I think we do see some pretty heavy ownership on him. I'm not concerned at all about his performance in the first game and how many minutes he played. He's just kind of a guy that I'm planning to plug in at that 5-3. And there's going to be a pecking order established here. It's going to take time because there's a lot of different options on the perimeter for this team. But I believe in Chris Beard. He is an excellent on-the-court basketball coach. Leave all that off-the-court stuff out of here. I think the big loser with Murray back is going to be Jalen Murray. I think Morrell will still do his thing as a scorer. I think what happens with Flanny is he takes a backseat as a scorer, but he still contributes highly in those peripheral categories. His price of 8.2 is fine, but I think ultimately we'll see him settle into like a 7K type of price point where he'll be viable. Murray's going to have to go down in the mid 5 to low 6K range. Morrell will be what Morrell is. He's going to continue to shoot a lot. And I think Murray ends up coming into the 7K range too. So I do like this Ole Miss team. Right now, Murray's going to be the main team play for me. And then I'm looking at Flanny, Morrell, and I'm probably off Murray completely. Jermaine Brakefield, every time I think he's, off, write him off, don't use him. He has a big game. He spiked 3 times in the past 5, a 40 against Cal, a 44 against NC State. He's playing extremely well. It's 27 real points, hit 5 threes against Cal. Big time performance for Brakefield. 7K forward. Again, I think ultimately the starting 5 or the 6-7 man rotation of Ole Miss, like all of those guys are going to be balanced and will be around 6.5 to 7K. Like, it'll just be a kind of pick your poison situation with this team ordinarily. They've also got Mo Cisse back, who returned back in early December, a couple of weeks ago before all this 2-time transfer business happened. He played 21 minutes against Cal, 24 against UCF. We're seeing Cisse play more and more minutes. His role continues to solidify here. What they're doing is starting Jamarian Sharp, but then they're going to Mo Cisse relatively quick, and Sharp's kind of stuck playing these low to mid-teens minutes. Cisse, if he goes in the starting lineup at 4-3, going up against Troy, you've got to definitely consider him. High-end shot blocker, really good rebounder, somebody at 4-3 that makes a lot of sense, and he's playing a forward slot that we can cheap out on. Gotta love that. And then TJ Caldwell will end up probably being a loser with Murray back too. And I don't mean like he's a loser. I just mean like losing out in minutes and usage, right? We already saw that against Cal. 3.9 is a acceptable price to utilize him, but just be advised with Murray back, he's going to be an odd man out, most definitely. Looking at the Troy numbers, they play at the 65 fastest tempo, so they're fast, right? Defensively, 208th. They are not a particularly good team inside the arc. They're 336th in 2-point percentage. They are a better 3-point shooting team. They cannot defend the 3, but they can shoot the 3. And they also rebound quite well when it comes to second chance opportunities. They're not a great team at keeping their opponents off the glass. So offensive rebounders crush them, but they do good on utilizing and creating second opportunities, at least against their opponents that they've faced so far. They did have a double overtime loss to Oregon State, in which they lost by only 1 point. They lost by just 18 to a tough Ohio team that they were actually in that game a lot. A tough OT loss by 2 to Sam Houston State. And then they recently lost by 12 to Dayton. If this team was a doorstop, you would expect a team like Dayton to completely blow their doors off. Deron Holmes had 23 and 17 for reference in that game. Big time performance. Kobe Elvis had 24. We saw several other players with acceptable games, but Elvis and Deron Holmes really, really went off in that game. And that's something that the Troy team is going to have happen to them a lot. They're going to give up big rebounding performances. Tyler Bilodeau for Oregon State had 12 rebounds in that game. This is a spot for Ole Miss where I think Mo Cisse could be the guy and is extremely sneaky. His rebounding rates aren't that great just yet. His usage rate is super low. He hasn't really got time to get that into the high fantasy point per minute role that we saw him play last year at times for Oklahoma State. Has the high block rate already, Mo Cisse is somebody that I find to be a sneaky value. And we might come away from this Ole Miss game with two players, Murray and Cisse, with very minimal salary used. On the Troy side, the starting group that they typically run, or what they did against Dayton, Theo Sang, Victor Valdez, Jackson Fields, Christian Eugene, and Amir Muhammad. Off the bench, Miles Rigsby, Thomas Dowd, and Tayton Connerway. They run about an 8 to 9 man rotation usually, with Sang coming off the bench in the non-D1 game in their last, and Thomas Dowd got the start, but that could be a situation in which it was opponent-based. But they are a team that has had a few changes in their starting lineup throughout. Dowd has been in and out of the starting lineup throughout. So that's just something to be aware of. Dowd at 6K. It's not that great of a play anyways, whether he starts or not. I would just relatively ignore him anyways. At 7-7, the top per price option here, Christian Eugene, averaging over 30 fantasy points per game. That'll get some people looking. Shooting 47% from long range, has an assist rate of 30% and a 24% shot rate as well as usage rate. Don't hate the option. I think Ole Miss, their defense under Chris Beard is sharpening quickly. But Eugene is kind of the, low to mid-major guy who could certainly pop off here. I think he would be considered more of a luxury play. When you look at some of the games Ole Miss has played, they did a nice job handcuffing Jalen Cone recently. Keontae Kennedy had a nice 11, 7, and 6 type game, but offensively they held him to very minimal shots. Jalen Tyson had a monster 22, 4, and 3. I actually took his PRA in that game and it came through. And then you look at the game against UCF, in which they really struggled. Outside of Flanny, that was a real nasty game to watch. But Darius Johnson had 25. Shamari Allen had 14. Jalen Sellers had 11 and 4. So it's not like the Ole Miss defense is to a Chris Beard level just yet. He doesn't have his personnel in. They are 10-0, but they're 117th in defensive ranking per KenPom. So usually we're used to a Chris Beard team being top 50 at minimum. So I don't think we have to full fade Eugene by any means, but he's definitely not a priority play. And it wouldn't shock me to see him be under 30 fantasy points, but he's a guy to look at. 6'5", Tayton Connerway. Now, Connerway has some nice rates, 28% shot rate, 33% usage rate, draws over 7 fouls per 40, but he does have a 6.2 fouls called per 40 rate himself. And he's not a center. He's not a big, tall front court player. He's just a dude that hand checks and reaches in and does a lot of silly things. He's very, for a junior, very undisciplined defensively. Now, I've seen a couple of Troy games so far this season, the Sam Houston overtime game and the Dayton game. And that was my takeaway coming away with it, is that Connerway was just very excitable and undisciplined on defense. So that's the reason for the great rates, higher price, but porous overall upside that you'll be seeing when you look at his logs. Everyone else pretty much sub 6K, not a ton to be excited about there. Amir Muhammad at 5'6" is at least playable, but a relatively low-end option. Would rather just play Murray myself. All right, next game, South Carolina, a team we've grown to be very frustrated with, and their opponent, which is the Winthrop Eagles. It's a 10-point spread in favor of South Carolina, 143.5 total. Starting with the South Carolina side, this game on KenPom, 77-67 in favor of South Carolina. Very slow tempo, 329th in tempo, 111th defensive efficiency. Winthrop, 249th in defense per KenPom, and 255th in tempo, coming off a 75-59 loss to Xavier. South Carolina coming off a 73-69 win over Charleston Southern by the skin of their teeth. They are 9-1 under Lamont Paris so far this season, so good on them for that. They have nice quality wins over George Washington, East Carolina, and Virginia Tech. Looking at the roster and the rotation, it really comes down to, if you're using somebody from South Carolina, it's generally going to be, or you're going to want it to be, Michi Johnson or BJ Mack, both of which are priced up 7.5 and 7.6 accordingly. But there is a lot of downside with the other options on this team. There's just a lot of inconsistency. Michi Johnson has a usage rate of 29% and a shot rate of 32% while making 40% of his long-range shots. BJ Mack, 29% usage rate, 33% shot rate, 33% from long range. Also has solid rebounding and block numbers. Mack is a bit of a fouler in good spots, so you have to be aware of that. I would rather just pay for Michi Johnson, but if you need a forward, Mack isn't such a bad look here against Winthrop. Michi has kind of taken the alpha role for this team. We know he's going to score a lot. If he adds anything in the rebounding, assist, steals department, he has potential slate breaking upside. He rattled off 3 straight games of 40-plus fantasy points during that stretch against Notre Dame, George Washington, and Clemson. So definitely worth a look there at 7-6, and he has been a popular option on most DFS slates over the last month of the season. Then you get into Talon Cooper at 6'8", who's a middling option at best, but he is playing a lot of minutes. And then you have a ton of value. Miles Stute at 4-1. This will probably be a very popular play. Stute is far from a safe option. His fantasy point per minute number is low, but we're talking about a 4.1K look. Shot rate for Stute is doable at 22%. He's shooting 39% from long range, but he doesn't do a lot else. I really expected Stute to be a more viable look on a game-to-game basis coming over from Vanderbilt. His minutes from a game-to-game basis also aren't that predictable. Sometimes it's 29, sometimes it's 17. Doesn't really get into foul trouble. And overall, his shooting, like I said, from long range is pretty solid, almost 40%. But outside of hitting threes, there's not a lot that we can count on from him. So he is a lower end value, but I think people will just click him in and knowing that we want to probably pay for Woolbright, we're going to need a couple of these value looks, and Stute fits the mold there. But just know that we could get 30 minutes out of him, and he puts up less than a half fantasy point per minute. That's a real likely outcome. But that 4-1 price will attract a lot of people. So I want to make it clear there that he's going to be chalk. Stephen Clark also starts, but he doesn't see as many minutes. He's kind of that token fifth starter that is out there for 10 to 15 minutes, and then that's it. Then we see a rotation amongst the freshmen, Morris Ugas, Jacoby Wright, who I do like, Zachary Davis, who I do like, and then we see minutes for Josh Gray and Benjamin Bosmans-Verdonk, neither of which are viable DFS options. Jacoby Wright at 3.6 is a real nice look at 3.6 in this matchup. I think he is a guy we can look at for value as well, maybe more of a GPP option. Can definitely hit shots and can contribute a little bit in all categories. I like him as a pivot off maybe a chalkier Miles Stute. He doesn't have huge upside. His floor is lower than Stute's, but there is a good chance that he could hit a 4X number at 3X in 22 minutes, or roughly 20 to 22 minutes against this Winthrop club. So that's a name that I want to kind of push you towards for some exposure. And then Zachary Davis, almost identical in that regard, can hit shots, does rebound fairly decently. His overall rates are less usage-wise, but he has a better rebounding rate, and he has a very nice steal rate, highest on the team, and he's making about 37% of his threes. So we might get out of Zachary Davis 18 to 22 minutes, 8 to 9 real points, 3 or 4 rebounds. Maybe he gets a steal, hits 2 threes, bang, paying off that 3.5. So some GPP value on South Carolina that I want to rotate around. The freshman Morris Ugas played 24 minutes against Southern, did pay off this price there. Are we going to see more minutes from him going forward? Hard to say, because he played 24 against VMI earlier in the season, and then he went back to playing 6 to 10. So I do want to do a little bit more work there and research and looking at boards and getting a sense of where this freshman stands, because he does look the part and could be somebody that we're seeing in the rotation heavily. They're rotating again that fifth starter spot, and Miles Stute seems to be capped at around 20 to 25 minutes. So all of these other options at guard are going to be getting minutes too. Hitting the right one could go a long way between min cashing falling on your face or outright banking this slate. Winthrop side is not that appealing. They are a team for years that has been relatively deep. Under that was Pat Kelsey, who coached them for years. Now they're coached by Mark Prosser. They still play a similar style. Defensively, they're lacking. Of course, we mentioned they're playing a 6, 7, 8 man rotation that is very balanced. Kaysen Harrison, Nick Johnson, KJ Doucette, Chase Claxton, and Kelton Talford have been the starters. Then we see Sincere McMahon, Alex Timmerman, and Yora Diallo for the bench pieces. And there are really not a ton of guys that are priorities for me in any format. KJ Doucette has the highest shot rate on the team at 27.5% and the highest usage rate at 27.6%, also making 40% of his triples. Kaysen Harrison, 25% usage rate, 27% assist rate, drawing 5.5 fouls per 40. Those are players 1 and 2 at the top of the pecking order. Then you have Sincere McMahon hitting 41% of his threes off the bench. Alex Timmerman has a top 50 offensive rating, a combined rebounding rate over 30%, and overall just very heavily involved in the rotation there. And then you have a bunch of 19 to 20% shot rate guys in the rest of the starting lineup and the rotation in general. Doucette with his highest rates at 7.4, but really, to me, not the best look there. He does have a couple of 30s that he's rattled off recently, but opponents-wise haven't been great. Playing Xavier really kind of exposed him there. He does have some foul issues in certain spots, and I think going up against South Carolina, he's going to have a hard time generating rebounds and easy looks there. Harrison at 6'8", I think probably the most realistic option you could use from Winthrop. Taking a ton of shots. He's going to be initiating the offense. I do worry about him not scoring, getting handcuffed, and creating or being forced into a lot of turnovers. So he's not a guy that I'm looking at. I'm probably not even falling there as a last man in. I don't start to get too serious about this team until I get to the bench piece, Sincere McMahon, at 4.2K. And even then, he's a lower end option, but when he is on the floor, he's going to be chucking threes. And if he can connect with 3 of those, possibly a 4th even, he's going to end up being close to paying this 4-2 off. He's not going to give us much in those other categories, but if the offense struggles for Winthrop or they get stagnant, McMahon's going to come out there and he does have the green light to chuck. And South Carolina's 3-point defense has been one of the worst units in the SEC from a percentage or efficiency standpoint. So might Sincere McMahon work out? Yes. A lot of speculative value on this slate, but it could turn out a lot like tonight with a lot of 2.5x performances, and he's definitely in that realm as well. Last game on the slate, we have Marquette versus Providence, the nightcap, the hammer, if you will. Wish we could have gotten the Florida State North Florida game at one time. We had a lot of North Florida action, but I get it. Or even the UCLA nightcap game, but it's a 4.5-point spread in favor of Marquette, 145.5 total. This is a game I'm personally really uncomfortable with. I'm the type of guy that, and I know, and I've gotten way better about it, but I, used to be so enamored with or obsessed with, like, I got to have a hammer play. Like, everyone's going to pass me. And I know, like, if you build a lead, you don't need a hammer play. But after having so many guys pass me with that last game, it's kind of ingrained in our head. And I can't begin to tell you how uncomfortable with both of these teams I am, especially Providence right now, because I don't see a lot of safety there. Marquette, 19th in defensive efficiency per Ken Palm, 12th in offense of ranking, 118th tempo. Very, very good team. They got a test from St. Thomas. They answered the call there. Tyler Kolek had a kind of a bad offensive game, but he did have 10 assists. Cam Jones also, kind of a lackluster game there. Oso Ighodaro dominated with 21 and 8. Chase Ross, who took the start for Stevie Mitchell, who was out, 11 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal. He played very well. Then we saw Ben Gold and Sean Jones off the bench. So for Marquette, there's not a lot of excitement for their options. I suppose if Stevie Mitchell is out once again, he's still dealing with that hamstring issue, we would be forced into a chalky Chase Ross, who was very high owned at 4.8 on that last slate. The only thing is, it's the last game on the slate, and if we don't have the Mitchell news prior to the second game of our second wave of games locking, you're going to have to just make a decision like, okay, I'm playing Chase Ross. If Mitchell plays, I'm stuck with Ross, or perhaps I'm going over to a Jaden Pierre, who could be looking at a bunch of extra minutes too, due to the fact that Devin Carter dealing with a back issue that keeps flaring up, and Corey Floyd, who is also listed as questionable for this game, dealing with some sort of personal issue, it sounds like. So you have a built-in swap there that you can make, and using either of those guys, I suppose, is what a lot of people will do, I foresee, at least looking at the values here. If Mitchell were to play, it makes Ross, less appealing. He's going to slide from the 28 to 30 minutes he's been playing back down to 15 to 20. Mitchell is not in play for me if he starts. I know he's 4.9, but we already know at this point Mitchell just stands around a lot. If he's not making shots, he's really not offering or adding a lot of value to us. So Ross, obvious. Mitchell, no. If you want a different option or a pay up, I don't think I like Tyler Kolek all that well. With Devin Carter in the mix, it's going to be real difficult for Kolek. He's going to be harassed. Without Carter, things would be a lot easier for Kolek. But 8.5, it's just such an exorbitant amount of money to pay for him. I have a lot of trust issues. We did get that big game from him, 53 fantasy points, 28 and 6. That was nice. Also followed that up with a 40 against Notre Dame. So he can put together some big production. We know that. But I just don't feel all that great about paying 8.5 for him against Providence in the way that I think this game will play out. Oso Ighodaro back up over 7K. He's had back-to-back really good games forward. He's just not, to me, that tough. And the Providence front court, it's not world beaters right now either. I mean, I do feel like Josh Odoro could push him around a little bit, but fouls are always a risk there. Oso is more of a secondary play at best for me personally. I think if any of the top three on Marquette, I'd be looking to Cam Jones, but he's also mainly a scorer. And we've identified several other options around his range that are just in really much better spots and have the same floor, but better upside. So it comes down to playing Ross or not, depending on that news. Providence side, again, Jaden Pierre at 4.6. He would be the look or the swap if Stevie Mitchell plays. In that game against Sacred Heart, Pierre did start. He played 34 minutes next to Bryce Hopkins. Garwi Duell started, played 33 minutes. Josh Odoro and Ticket Gaines. Rich Barron off the bench played 25 minutes. Rafael Castro played 7. Really nothing else. And that ended up being a close game for a time, and then they pulled away against Sacred Heart there. Jaden Pierre is the streaky sophomore. Did miss 3 games towards the end of November. But even as a starter throughout the season, he's seen his minutes kind of on the lower 20, 25 side. Would be getting a nice spike here without Floyd and without Carter. The main thing was Garwi Duell starting in that game, playing 33 minutes and looking pretty well. Now, he's expected to be an NBA draft pick. Maybe not right away, but he has major upside and just a really exciting player. Seeing him start and play that kind of minutes there, we'll monitor. I don't think we're going to leave, well, at least I'm not going to probably leave 2 spots open, but this just offers us another look. Whereas if Mitchell plays, we can swap and leave some salary, perhaps. Pierre's fine, but say Floyd's playing, then maybe we can look to Duell if he starts at 3.8 and leave some salary on the table. Maybe you're, chasing a guy or you're within a couple of points and you've got it figured out salary-wise that he has Pierre. Then you go to Duell. Like there's some scenarios there where you got to try to outplay somebody. But I would like him at 3.8 if he starts. Absolutely. Ticket Gains at 5.1 is just an ordinary play for me, rather lackluster. I know he just hammered Wagner recently. in a game where he put up 38. But overall, when you look at what he's been actually producing, a lot of like 10-4 type games where he's not horrible, but he's fine. Brown, 3 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists. Oklahoma in 22 minutes, he had 2 rebounds, 2 assists. Like, he's just not that great of a play for me, even though the 5-1 price point is relatively appealing and would be without Carter. Oduro at 7-3, I think, is he's going to be a foul risk here going up against Marquette. The Marquette front court, I keep wanting that to be a DVP to target, and it should be. But when you watch Marquette games and you see the lack of production by opposing bigs, it's just they're doing a great job on the low block, keeping guys off the glass, getting them to foul trouble, and just preventing them from having these monster games. So I do like Oduro from a GPP standpoint if you believe that Oso can be pushed around. But based off the way they've been able to handle other elite bigs, which are much better than Oduro, such as Hunter Dickinson, it makes it a very risky play. And the same can be said about Bryce Hopkins at 8-4. Hit his ceiling against Sacred Heart, but you know the deal on Hopkins. He's GPP all the way, up and down performance. Really not interested in prioritizing him for my main build personally. Well, I like the flexibility that we get with his guard forward eligibility, but he's just he's broke our hearts way too many times. He's a GPP play and will remain a GPP play until his price either drops fully or he rattles off like 8 straight. And even then of like 30 plus. And even then I'm still really leery of him. Devin Carter, if he plays, I think we still fade him. Back issues are nothing to mess with. Carter has been fantastic this season. Total breakout season in this system with Ed Cooley gone. We have seen a totally, recharged team under Kim English, and Devin Carter has been absolutely fantastic. So ordinarily I'd look at 8-1 and say, yeah, let's roll it. But back issues can flare up. If he does start, I would be really worried that something else would, tweak that and really just kind of more of a deep alt play there at best. Not one of the guys at 8K that I'm going to be prioritizing. And we've already kind of highlighted those other options in his range that we like. So that's the big one for that game, is monitoring Mitchell's news or his starting status. Garwi Dual, Jaden Pierre, and Chase Ross. One of those guys should be in your lineup there, depending on how that news breaks. So make sure you save one of them, put them in your utility. Do not put them in the guard spot and waste them early. You want to have that flexibility to use a guard or a forward. I'm seeing a lot of errors lately in both our opponents, which we love to see them make that error that causes them to be hamstrung, but also the people in our community really want to make sure that you're properly building your lineup in such a way that allows you to have the maximum amount of players available to swap to in those situations. All right, that is the slate. The core for the slate as it stands right now. And again, I'm not going to be writing up the article. That will be our chief content officer, Mike Randall. We love him. But my core will be starting off at 4.3K at forward, Mo Cisse. I feel really good about this matchup. I think that we're going to see at least 20 minutes from him. He doesn't need much more than that to pay off, but we could see even more. 25 perhaps, and put up a big number where he's pulling down 10 plus rebounds, getting some block shots, whatever he can add for actual buckets made. Also very high on Brandon Murray at 5'3". I won't core 2 from Ole Miss, but just know they're both going to be in my lineup most likely. Like Cisse and Murray a high amount, but Cisse will be the one that we core. As far as pay-ups go, I think I'm finding that way. I'm looking at the Woolbright, Minix, Jones, Ware, Kolick, Hopkins, Samuel. It's just not that exciting. So with the value that we have in Cisse and a couple of these others, I just think it makes way too much sense to roster Vontarius Woolbright at 9.2K, the most expensive player on the slate. We're repeatedly victimized by these pay-ups, but I think Woolbright does us right with Woolbright. So we will core him as the pay-up portion of the core. And number 2, just way too good. I can't get away from him. I feel right about it. I feel absolutely right about it. And then the third member of the core, and this one was much tougher to come by because there's a lot of options here below Reese Beekman that I think could end up panning out, and I actually like quite a bit. But looking at the Butler side, going up in this matchup against Georgetown, we have to like our man Posh Alexander. And if you're not on the Posh train, that's fine. You'll want to use Pierre Brooks or Jamil Telford. I think you want one of these three Butler guys over 7K. I'm going to go with Posh Alexander. I'm also going to double mark him as the Posh play of the day, his namesake, this creation of our version of the sneak play of the day named after Posh Alexander. It's only fitting that we use him and look for a big 32, 35 fantasy point performance. It's not breaking the slate. It's not melting the slate, but it's over 4X. And I think Posh is going to give Georgetown some serious nightmares. Well rested after their blowout win against the non-D1. He only had to play 18 minutes there. Look for him to play 35 to 36 minutes and get the job done for us as the Posh play of the day. So to recap, our core going into battle: Posh Alexander, Mo Cisse, and Vontarius Woolbright. That's a strong three. Let's go. All right, let's get into prize picks and any bets that we like, prop bets or otherwise, and then we'll head out of here. We will head out of here because I have quite the busy day tomorrow. Not looking forward to it. I just would rather be sitting at home all day, talking hoops with you guys and tracking transfer portal stuff in college football. I don't know what's with prize picks not having fantasy points available lately for CBB. I guess they might be getting, taking it in the shorts or something because they have not been allowing us any fantasy point stuff lately. Like, I'd love to take Posh Alexander fantasy points if that was available at like 21.5. PRA kind of, like he's going to get steals and blocks. So it makes it tough, but we will take Posh Alexander's assist props. It's 5.5, which, will feel a bit high, but this Georgetown matchup, man, it's just too good. He had 6 assists against Cal, 6 against Buffalo, 11 against Texas Tech, just the 4 in 18 minutes against the non-D1, playing a closer game and being able to run at home against the Hoyas will lead to many opportunities where Posh sets the table for his teammates. So over 5.5 assists. We like it. We love it. We're locking that one in. Now, we think that Isaac McNeely is going to be required to shoot a lot of threes, right? I mean, he always is. That's never a question. And he's going to have to definitely make shots against this Memphis team. Now, he has a point prop of 11.5, which is fine. But he has this 3-point prop, which is going to be on the high side. But looking at what you can beat Memphis with and how they're going to have to play this, McNeely's probably taking 8 to 10 threes in this matchup. His prop is 2.5. That's a lot. Do we think he can make 30% of his 10 attempts? I do. So I'm going to take the over 2.5 threes for Isaac McNeely. Also, we'll take my man Posh, who has a 3-point prop of 0.5. He doesn't really make threes, but can he make one against Georgetown? He'll take 2 or 3. So I like those chances. I will also take that. And then we have a rebounding prop here. Since he's playing Merrimack, it's not on the slate. They've got Victor Larkin. They've got Aziz Bendago, 2 strong rebounders. I like Bendago, who's not a big-time scorer. Victor Larkin is. Larkin's kind of handling the scoring. Bendago's kind of taking over that rebounding, shot-blocking role. So I like his rebounding prop against Merrimack over 10.5. Again, might feel a little bit high, but when you go into it and dig into the numbers and how he's playing, that is an achievable rebounding number for him in a matchup against an overmatched Merrimack squad. And then I have 1 points prop here for you as well. Comes on the later games here. St. Mary's, it's been a real tough season for St. Mary's. They have not played the way that a lot of people expected them to. They stumble out to a 6-5 record, although they did just beat UNLV in double overtime. They have a real nice win over a Colorado State team that will be playing in the tournament in March, and then they beat Cleveland State at home, which Cleveland State is with Enaruna, a very good team in their own right. The Mitchell Saxon, Aiden Mahaney, Alex Dukas, Josh Jefferson group, they can do some things, and they're strong. But Aiden Mahaney, who has been playing a ton of minutes in year 2, started the season out super, super hot, 25 real points against New Mexico. He has been really hit or miss since, kind of hit this sophomore wall, if you will. But he has this points prop that's extremely favorable at 12.5. Still taking a ton of shots, and a lot of them from long range. Playing against a team in which Ken Pom has them winning 64-51, Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee does not defend the 3 very well. In fact, they don't do a whole lot of anything very well. But I like Mahaney's chances to score over 12.5. So we'll take the over there as well. And then I have one under, which is Tyler Kolek, under 16.5 real points. Not for the faint of heart. I think he'll still get 8 to 10 assists. He'll have his rebounds. Probably somewhere between 12 to 15 real points. But going against Providence, I do think his scoring takes a hit here. So under 16.5. Now we look at DraftKings, which is our primary sports book we like to look at on the show. For any of your betting, props, totals, any of that stuff, those opportunities. There are games starting as early as 8 a.m. on the West Coast between Hampton and Bowling Green. So that's a pretty fun one. Valparaiso. Notre Dame playing Seton Hall later in the day. Anytime Notre Dame is favored by 9, I don't care who the opponent is. They have not proven to us that they can beat anyone by 9+ points. Now, they certainly have, before Western Michigan, they won 86-65, one of their best games. But they struggled to beat a very good, I guess, to a degree, Niagara team. They lost to Western Carolina by double digits at home. They beat up on Maryland Eastern Shore, so good on them. Lost by 12 to South Carolina. Got blitzed by Miami. Georgetown, which is not a very good team, they just lost. It just feels very, very unattainable for them to win by 9+. Ken Pom has it 67-60. And the Citadel is not like some super great team either, right? Like defensively, they're almost in the 300s. But this is a play against Notre Dame and less for Citadel. So Citadel +9. That's our line that we're taking on this one. I don't know. I don't feel like they're going to be covering that. Also like Virginia +3, but if they can't hold David Jones, that's going to be a long one for them. But I am leaning into that one for sure. And then one more line here before we look at any props that we might be hitting. UNC Greensboro +2.5 against High Point. All right, props that we are getting available to us here. -110 for the 5.5 Posh Alexander assist. So we'll take that here as well. That's something that we like. PRAs, we have much more available to us. Will Richard, 16.5 points, rebounds, assists versus Michigan. I am definitely looking at taking the over there. That feels like a pretty nice spot with Richard playing as good as he is. Michi Johnson against Winthrop, -120 for 23.5 points, rebounds, assists. He's kind of the all-everything for this team, high usage, as we talked about. I also like his over 16.5 real points there at -125. So we're hitting a couple of Michi Johnson props and feeling good about it. And then one more, which is a PRA play. UCLA, Sebastian Mack, getting back into rhythm after missing some time there. Has a points, rebounds, assist prop of 18.5 at -125. I am looking at the over there as well, going up against Cal State Northridge. Mack, in a starting role, playing over 30 minutes. He had 14 and 6 last time out. Got to feel like he can get 20 combined PRA against this Northridge club. That is it. We did it. That's the big slate. As we get into the season deeper, these Tuesday slates are going to be large. Their Tuesdays and Saturdays are usually the flagship slates where they're marquee games and huge in size, and contests typically are going to be very, very glamorous. We're getting into the holiday season. We're deep in it. We're not getting into it. We are in it. Christmas right around the corner. That means the Diamond Head Classic, which is a MTE event tournament that happens during that time, December 21st, 22nd, and Christmas Eve in Honolulu. So we will have a numerous amount of games there at our disposal that we'll be grinding through. So there still will be coverage throughout, and I will have shows all Christmas week. So rest assured, we'll have content coming at you throughout. I'm just looking at that real quick. Yeah, so there'll be Christmas Eve games, but the 23rd, Saturday, December 23rd, there should be a sizable amount of games there for us to choose from. Seton Hall, Xavier, Mississippi State, Rutgers, Butler, Providence, Arizona, Florida Atlantic. So it'll be a nice size slate. We'll be talking about that one Friday night and beyond. So expect shows the entire week. Looking forward to it. Thanks to everyone who continues to support the show. We'll be back tomorrow night, same time, same place. Let's get those green screens and everything in between. Window trips with Randall. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. I'll see you later. Best of luck. Peace.